Thank you, everybody, for coming to our fourth event.
Well, thank you.
The Judi Bari versus the FBI with some esteemed members of our legal team who are from my left, your right. Alicia Littletree, most valuable paralegal, the MVP. Dennis Cunningham, lead attorney. Ben Rosenfeld, Dennis's other attorney. And Josh Morsell, who edited Judi Bari's deposition for trial, as well as took notes of every single day of trial and transcribed them for the legal team to review. So Josh Morsell.
I'm the currently most encyclopedically knowledgeable person about this entire case and investigation.
Somebody.
I also want to give special thanks both to the Mendocino County Museum, once again, and to Karen Matson, the curator back there in the orange sweater. This was originally scheduled for last year. The 30th anniversary was delayed by the pandemic, and but Karen said, we're going for it this year no matter what. And so here we are under the beautiful shade of the blue canopies. So my name's Darryl Cherney. I was co-plaintiff with Judi Bari. I was in the passenger seat of the car when it blew up. And I was certainly present and accounted for when Special Agent Phil Sena and Special Agent Stockton Buck saw me in the emergency room after the doctor was finished pulling glass out of my eye and stitching me up a little bit over here. And when Special Agent Sena said to me, well, who do you think did this to you? And I said, well, it could have been Candy Boak and Mother's Watch, or I gave him the laundry list, all the death threats in my backpack, and he just waved his hand and said, look, we can tell that this is your bomb, so why don't you just confess, make it easy on all of us, and get it over with. And of course I said the magic words that you're always supposed to say under a circumstance like that, which is, I want to talk to my lawyer.
Yeah! What was that?
That was not Dennis Cunningham at the time. It was actually Doug Horngrad who came to our defense with his team. Doug Horngrad had defended us when we were all arrested at the Golden Gate Bridge a mere 30 days earlier on April 24th. April 24th was a special day because not only did Greg King and company lead a climbing of the Golden Gate Bridge, but that was also the same day that bomb school took place up at College of the Redwoods in Mendocino County, where we believe the plot to bomb Judi Bari was hatched between Special Agent Frank Doyle, the head of the terrorism division, who taught bomb school in Humboldt County, and former Humboldt Sheriff Deputy and at the time current Chief of LP Security, Louisiana Pacific Security, Frank Wigginton, who rented LP's clear cut to the FBI. So immediately you had a connection between the FBI and Louisiana Pacific. And to be clear on the matter, although Judy certainly was premier in taking on Pacific Lumber and saving Headwaters Forest, her principal adversary was Louisiana Pacific. And this is not about who bombed Judi Bari today, but I want to just give a little background that we believe the plot to bomb Judi Bari was there at bomb school on April 24th when LP and Pacific and the FBI were busy blowing up the insides of cars with pipe bombs. So then it all kind of starts there. So when the FBI blamed both Judy and myself for bombing ourselves, you know, the whole concept of suing them was sort of in the back of our heads, but the first thing we had to do was protect Judy from somebody making a second attempt on her life because they had failed to kill her on the first attempt. And then by the time, 6 months, 8 months rolled around, we were thinking about a lawsuit. But we hadn't really gotten it together to decide upon a lawyer. And that was when I got a call from Tracy Cattleman of Earth First, and later on from so many different organizations, including Trees Foundation. And Tracy calls me up and says, I just ran into attorney Bill Simpich on the BART. I told him about your case, and Bill Simpich would like to file a civil rights lawsuit for you. And it was William Simpich who filed the original complaint against the FBI, their agents, the Oakland Police, the Mendocino County Sheriffs, the Humboldt County Sheriffs, and I'm probably leaving a few defendants out, but it was like 25 or 30 defendants on that very lengthy list of various law enforcement who had received the death threats from Judy or myself and failed to act. But in any case, the original case was argued at first by Bill Simpich, and then we realized that we needed additional help. And that's when our private investigator, who was hired for us by Greenpeace, Sheila O'Donnell, said, I know this great civil rights attorney named Dennis Cunningham who could join you in your case. And Dennis Cunningham came on board right then. And Dennis brought with him also Bob Bloom, another esteemed civil rights attorney. And of course, Ben Rosenfeld, his protege and partner at the office. And then later on, Tony Serra came on board. The great Tony Serra. And then Tony Serra, amazing attorney who staples his cuffs together instead of wearing cufflinks. He uses staples. He has long, stringy hair. And because Tony is such a genius that he argued the two Native American, he argued to defend the two Native Americans, both accused of murdering police officers, one who did it and one who didn't do it, and he got them both off of not guilty in front of all white juries. That was Tony Serra, a total magician in an absolute insane thrift store outfit that he wears to trial every day. You have to watch Tony Serra in action. I always said watching Tony Serra is watching Mick Jagger. It's like watching a Rolling Stones concert. The man is amazing.
Cuter, too.
Back to the lawsuit. So that's kind of how this thing got founded. And of course, there was discovery and depositions. Depositions are part of discovery. Discovery is when, as Judy would say, you get to look at theirs and they get to look at ours, you know? And so we got a bunch of documents, including photographs of the bomb car, and then we got to ask them a bunch of questions. And I did sit in the deposition room, as did Alicia Littletree, and of course Dennis Cunningham did a lot of the questions. Ben, were you in the depositions at any point? Come see, come sa. But Judy was at all of them. And the funny thing about Judy is that only Dennis is supposed to ask questions when we're questioning whatever cop is there in the room. But Judy would always interrupt Dennis or interrupt the situation and ask the defendant, whether it was an Oakland police officer, FBI agent, a question, and they would answer her before their attorney realized what was happening. No, she can't ask questions, but it was too late.
Or Dennis would say, I adopt her question.
The depositions were amazing. We took a deposition of Richard Held. I was there for 3 days. These depositions lasted for hours and they lasted for days. Of course, they were very evasive. During trial, Special Agent Frank Doyle, who was the head of the terrorism division, was asked during trial, I'm kind of bouncing ahead a little bit, but he was asked during trial if he had answered a certain question a certain way during his deposition. And he responded, well, if I knew then what I know now, I would have said, I don't recall. So that was actually pretty emblematic of the entire trial, by the way. That was just the way it was. Okay. When Judi Bari passed away, she gave me something which I entitled Judy's Last Instructions. I sat down with her for a couple of hours, I recorded our conversation, and I transcribed it. And what Judi Bari said was, no matter what, you keep Dennis Cunningham as our lead attorney. No matter what. And yeah, he was the only one who could do it. And from my personal experience, from a spiritual perspective, Dennis and Bill were the spiritual founders of the lawsuit. Not just the legal founders, but also the spirit of the lawsuit came from Dennis Cunningham and Bill Simpich and Bob Bloom. And so we kept Dennis Cunningham and we ran that horse to the finish line. During the discovery process, we also went to the death threats and did DNA testing back in the year 2000, just before the trial was going to start. And we discovered during this testing, over the objections of the FBI and the judge, Judge Claudia Wilkin, who Judi Bari called Sister Claudia,
Facetiously.
but Sister Claudia ruled that yes, we could do DNA samples, and the letter which took credit for the bombing. We're jumping around a lot here. The Death Threat Museum has the Lord's Avenger letter. If you go in there and take a look at it, the Lord's Avenger letter, which took credit for the bombing, described not one but two bombs accurately to the color of the wire, the brand of the pocket watch, the brand of the battery, the size of the pipe, the ingredients inside the bomb. The letter that took credit for the bombing, the DNA on that letter was that of an unknown female, which begs the question, did the Lord's Avenger, who wrote the letter taking credit for the bombing, did the Lord's Avenger have a secretary?
Have a sister.
Yes. Or maybe the bomber was a woman.
Or a
It's hard to say.
A female FBI handler.
Yes, but the bigger point is that we did do DNA testing, and we have a bunch of other. We had DNA matches, we had typewriter matches that led to who we believe is an infiltrator down from Sonoma County. But nevertheless, the question of who bombed Judi Bari remains an open question, and that is not the discussion for today. Before I conclude, I want to talk a little bit about jury selection, because this whole thing went on, and the week before, it was right around September 4th, in fact, December 4th, 2001, September 4th, 2001, Alicia Littletree and I, after Judy's passing, 4 years earlier, we went to Washington, D.C. to lobby Congress, and we did lobby Congress to open up an investigation of who bombed Judi Bari and FBI behavior. And 7 days after we came home, 9/11 happened. And I actually had a truck full of equipment for the office, for the lawsuit office. We rented it from a place in Oakland that specialized in renting to nonprofit organizations. And I had paid, I think, 3 months rent in advance. This high-rise office building, but it actually specialized in nonprofits, believe it or not. It was only 3-4 blocks from the courthouse. And so there I was with a truck full of desks and chairs and file cabinets and everything that would go with an office.
I've still got one of those desks.
Yes, and if you ever wanted, we should have brought that desk to the museum.
I would like to, yes. That would be a good place for it.
In any case, it was later to become Supervisor John McCowan who told me about 9/11. And I called the office manager, and I believe her name was Stephanie, and she said, we're going to hold your money, we're not going to charge you rent, this is office buildings, downtown Oakland, we'll allow you to delay your trial, because the FBI requested a delay after 9/11, and we requested a delay after 9/11. And so it got moved all the way to, I think, May 7th, or 8th it was, of 2002. Or was it April? April 26th, yes. We should remember these things. But April 2002, the trial was rescheduled to.
That was March.
It was not March.
6 months later, so.
Yes. The thing I remember most about jury selection, the thing I remember seriously about jury selection, was watching like 150 strangers walk into the room. It we narrowed down to 12 people, and it brought tears to my eyes, because all of a sudden the trial became real. And these are totally random people, and we were allowed to pick 12, I believe, and we could go down to 9. In other words, in a civil lawsuit, you are allowed to have as few as 9 jurors. So the judge allowed us to have 12, and we actually did wind up with, I think, 9 at the end of the day. I don't think we had any alternates left. Regardless of that, we did wind up with enough jurors to make a decision. But just looking at these very average people, and one of those people was a woman named Mary Nunn, who truly wanted to be here, but she works. You get it, Kate. Kate's showing us a picture she drew of the jurors. Yes. And Mary Nunn, who I call the incredible talking juror, was very pro-Judy. And she, in that jury room, talked, later on, she talked on the radio about what happened during jury deliberation. And there was one point at which they were discussing various pieces of evidence, and they had them all taped to push pinned to a wall. And at one point, one of the pieces of paper fell off a push pin and onto the floor. And it turned out it was a very critical piece of evidence. And at that point, Mary Nunn and some of the jurors said that they thought Judy's ghost was in the deliberation room. And which I can assure them she was. Where else would she be? Exactly. And Mary Nunn would be here today, except she's a working gal, and she could not get the day off today, and she's so sorry she can't be here. But Mary was just amazing. The trial was magnificent, and we're going to let Dennis and Alicia and the others talk a little bit about the trial. But I will say that there's nothing quite like it. A 6-week trial. But I'll say one thing: the jury was about to deliberate, and they were about to come. The jury was about to come to its conclusion, and they decided to wait one extra day. They were going to do it on a particular day, and they waited one extra day to make their decision. And it was that evening, the evening that they delayed, moving it to the next day, that there was a lunar eclipse of the sun. The sun was eclipsed that day. It was like a 3/4 eclipse. And we all went to the roof. I don't know if everybody was there. We went to the roof of the building we were in, and we watched the solar eclipse. And I knew, when I saw that eclipse, I knew that was a good sign, that the dominant paradigm was going to be eclipsed. And so it was. I would really like to, I have the honor of introducing Dennis Cunningham, who has won quite a number of awards, including an award for defending the Attica prison inmates in New York State, for winning on their behalf, many of whom were killed, unjustly accused, and had to fight for their rights in prison. He represented the estate of Fred Hampton, who was murdered by the Chicago police with the help of the FBI, and he won Fred Hampton's family some money for that. Never enough, but he did take on that case. And too many other cases to recall, including Bear Lincoln here in Mendocino County, I do believe. And slap suits. He represented Earth First and slap suits. I mean,
And the pepper spray.
Pepper
Pepper
spray.
spray.
Pepper spray trial.
And the list is voluminous. He's dedicated his entire life to civil rights, as has Ben Rosenfeld and Bill Simpich and Bob Bloom. So without any further discussion, I want to just present to you the one and the only Dennis Cunningham.
I spent a while yesterday being questioned about the case and all the stuff that happened, and found out that there was an enormous amount that I don't remember. So my advice behind that is don't get over it. Because you lose a lot of stuff. But it also does come back, tend to come back, and Darryl's statements were mostly accurate. It's hard for me to think what to say about the case. There's one thing, though, that has stayed on my mind. We made a decision kind of early. I mean, it wasn't real early because I wasn't in the case real early. When I came in the case, Judge Lynch had thrown it out of court in San Francisco, and we did an appeal to get it reinstated. And somewhere along that, Darryl mentioned he had included the sheriff's departments from Mendo and where's the other one? Humboldt. And so, as defendants, because of the stuff that they were known to have done and said. But it seemed like,
And you hire police, right? Keplinger.
was he in the case? Is he the one that said that?
Yeah.
I think Satterwhite said that.
I thought it was Satterwhite.
I think it was Satterwhite.
So you
Yeah.
hire police?
No, he was the sheriff.
Want to bet?
I mean, if you guys are confused about what happened, just imagine our confusion.
No, it's been a long time. We were not confused at the time, trust me.
But there was a kind of inner debate about what we would accuse the FBI and the Oakland cops of doing. And really what it boiled down to was whether they had been in on the bombing or not. And we kind of decided, or maybe it was me that decided, not to reach that far, just to try to get him for the false arrest, because that was really concrete and there was no doubt about the proof. And it was just a question of the motive that they would have had for, arresting Darryl and Judy and accusing them, as was reported on the front page of the New York Times, above the fold with a picture of the car, that they were terrorists on their way someplace to plant that bomb. And we decided that was too much to take on, as opposed to simply the false arrest where they didn't have decent grounds to accuse them, and where, if you looked at the car, it seemed crazy to think they would carry a bomb which had a trigger that was set to go off. And so we left out the accusation that they had known about the bombing and been party to it. But I came to believe by the end of the case that they had, in fact, and clearly so. And that was based mostly on a kind of random piece of testimony by Reichs. What was his name? John Reichs? And John Reichs was the head of the terrorist squad of the San Francisco division of the FBI. So he was like the in-between leader of, this was his project. And what he testified to, which didn't ring a bell until later, was that he had been, on the day of the bombing, he had been at a luncheon meeting with the Russian ambassador and some mucky-mucks from the State Department, and they were going over the plans for the security of the visit by Gorbachev, which was happening, 4 or 5 days from then. And in the meeting at lunch, he got a phone call that said, a car was bombed in Oakland. And he, sorry folks, I got to go. And he got up and left that meeting in order to follow up on this report of a bombing, which struck me as completely ridiculous for such a person, unless there was a strong reason for it. And that reason would have been that they knew that bomb was going off and they knew they had to respond to that. And they did. He went back to the office and started directing the operation at the bomb scene, where Frank Doyle showed up. Frank Doyle said, I don't remember what I was doing that day. I was driving around the East Bay in my Suburban. And what was the other part? He went right to the scene, and he was there with the cops and telling them, insisting that the bomb had been on the floorboards in the back seat, and therefore that they must have seen it when they got in the car, and therefore that it was their bomb. And that was the evidence on which the two of them were arrested and accused, and the whole thing was publicized with them as the terrorists on their way to plant this bomb. And you know, when we finally got to see the car, it was extraordinary to believe that they had, or to think about them saying this bomb was in the back seat, because the hole was right through the driver's seat and the floorboards underneath, and the floorboards in the back seat were untouched, and the seat cover, the front of the seat cover of the back seat was completely intact, and the door was intact, and the front door had been blown out, as you see when you look at the car. And it was just an amazing thing. I remember there was one witness was a police sergeant from Oakland, Hanson, who was their bomb person and who had been at the bomb school. And we questioned him, and I asked him, well, what did you think about it? He said, well, I wasn't going to argue with my teacher from bomb school. And we finally did get information. I guess the movie, right, of the bomb school, and they have some footage.
No, we didn't have
of the
footage.
car.
We didn't have footage of bomb school, but we got the list of everybody who attended. We had
There was a movie with they were blowing up a car.
that's in my movie, but that's a different bomb school.
Oh. Fake bomb
You seen
school?
one, you seen them.
It's an annual course.
It was the bomb school.
You can just bring in actors?
Where they taught how to teach bomb school, and then they taught bomb school.
The bomb school was always just this amazing detail of the facts that and particularly the fact that the FBI had arranged to do it on LP land up there with Wigington.
We deposed him.
We deposed Wigington.
Yeah, when you're in the. He didn't say anything.
Well, he didn't say anything. I don't remember that at all.
Isn't he the one who said he carried a rope in his back of his truck for protesters or hippies?
He said that?
Pretty sure.
He said what?
He carried a rope in the back of his car for protesters.
For hanging us.
I think it was for tying us up. Let's let Dennis continue.
I know, it's better if we make it a group project. People have their memories, you know, and well, mine is shot.
Tie him up for civilian arrest.
Yeah, right.
Right.
Yes.
Not, instead of handcuffs, right?
We got that.
Okay. Well, I mean, that's just, it's kind of a sidelight at this point, I think, because I believed it, and I don't know who else I ever talked to or we ever had any discussions about it. The case was over when it became, by the time it was clear to me. And I, you know, I recalled that testimony of Rex about leaving the luncheon, which struck me as completely unlikely. You're sitting there with the Russian ambassador and State Department muck-to-mucks, and you're planning the visit of a premier of Russia coming to San Francisco, and you get up and leave in the middle of the meeting because a bomb went off in Oakland in a car. If they didn't know to tell him who was in the car, he would have never done that. That's just beyond the pale. That was the way I thought about it, and I still do to this day. The case really went on for a long time. And we did so many depositions, I think we did over 100.
Over 100.
And one after another, and the lawyers would come from Washington, and the agents would come, or the cops would come, and they would tell their stories, and we would just get a bunch of testimony from each one of them, much of which we used in the trial to ask them about the same stuff, so that it would get recited in front of the jury. They were not, and they weren't that well prepared to deny stuff or to cover it up. We got a lot of information out of it. And we certainly got a lot of information out of the documents, which we made Bill our document witness, and he testified in the trial about stuff he found in the documents, again showing their interest in the logging stuff, and then Earth First, and then Judy and Darryl, and you couldn't, I mean, it was just all plain when it happened, which was fortunate for us because it helped us win the trial. The whole process took 5 or 6 years, right?
Well, plus all the appeals.
And appeals took time. We had to appeal. And we had controversy within the plaintiff's camp about Richard Held Jr., who was an FBI princeling that was head of the San Francisco division, and his father had been a very high official in the FBI. I don't know if he still was then, but we had run across him in the Hampton case, and it was his project, clearly. And they had this other case right in Tucson where they infiltrated a group of Earth Firsters with a sworn agent from Washington, Michael Fane. And they got busted on their way to blow up a...
Nope.
No. Cut down.
Cut down.
I was going to mention that yesterday.
Cut down. Okay, well, that's good.
It was like
That's right. They were,
Torches, no explosives.
thermite.
We know what we're talking about, sorry.
where did the thermite come in if they were
The
cutting
FBI
it?
was trying to get them to use thermite, but they wouldn't.
No, the FBI attempted to get 5 activists to blow up power lines going in or coming out of a nuclear power plant in Arizona,
Right.
and instead they convinced the activists who would refuse to use explosives to use thermite, which cuts through steel to take
No,
down.
they didn't.
They used thermite to cut down. They didn't actually use anything.
They use thermite, which cuts through metals, but it's non-explosive. It doesn't blow
Right,
up.
it's an
It just-
incendiary
well, that's not what you
substance.
No,
It's the truth.
it's just, yeah.
I believe you.
Yes. You believe her, but you don't believe me.
Well, she was there. I thought they cut them with blowtorches. Anyway, it doesn't
They
matter.
didn't actually cut anything because they were
Oh, they
arrested.
were arrested
on their way to do
there.
that.
Yeah.
Karen is the Supreme Court of our historical.
Yeah, I wonder. I mean,
This
Judy
point.
said something different, but Karen was it.
They were arrested on the scene, not on their way there.
And Peg Millett escaped.
They got there, right? And
Yeah.
then they got arrested.
Yeah.
This is what a decentralized legal process is.
Yeah, the FBI agent brought them there, paid for the gas, got the cutting torch.
Had guns in the back of his pickup truck.
Right.
Yeah.
And we went to Washington DC, our nation's capital, and took his deposition too,
Michael Fane.
but he was not real forthcoming.
That's his training.
But it seemed clear also that their success in that case had led them to attempt to infiltrate that same crowd around the Bay Area. And there was that thing that happened in Santa Cruz, right?
Night action group.
Earth Night Action. What did they do?
They cut down a power line.
They cut down 3 power
On
lines.
Earth Day.
Uh-huh.
And Darryl wrote a song
Darryl
about
was
it.
on about
I've written something about all these things.
And didn't play.
And a song
One
about
song,
every
too.
step
They-
of the way.
They also infiltrated Montana Earth First in a tree spiking case. I believe 7 activists were arrested falsely. They eventually found the real tree spikers, but one of those original activists who was arrested has been nominated for Department of Interior.
She just got approved.
She just got approved. So we now have an Earth Firster who was actually arrested for tree spiking in Washington, D.C. at Department of Interior. What's her position?
We're winning!
Head of the BLM.
Head of Black Lives Matter.
No, the head of the Bureau of Land Management.
Wow. Why are there so many acronyms?
Anyway, we're winning. Yes, go ahead.
I was thinking about
Santa Cruz.
deposition of fame, because I think that was another thing that we sort of figured out without ever really trying to prove it, was that Senna, who was an FBI agent, he was assigned to try to infiltrate the Santa Cruz group, and that was their plan, was to do the same thing again that they had done in Tucson. But that didn't work out too good for them either. It's hard to know at this point, for me at least, what, other things about the case to talk about. When I was questioned yesterday, one thing that Laura, the movie, wanted to know was about Judy. And that opened up a lot of stuff to talk about. And I mean, people here were familiar with her, I know. And to me, she was really one of the very most extraordinary people I ever met or ran into in the work I did. And it was because of her leadership ability, I think. Was that she was a step ahead of everybody. And she understood how to talk about stuff in a way that people could respond to and understand what was the point. And she also had, she was sharp as sharp can be. And she would nail people, for being obtuse. But she always did it with a touch of humor that kept them from turning against her. I know there were a lot of people that were against her that thought she had been carrying a bomb, that believed that first thing that the cops put out, which is always the case, lie gets halfway around the world before the truth gets roots on it. But it was her determination to get some recompense for what had happened, and when it happened to her, which of course was a horrifying thing, and left her crippled, and probably led to her early death, at least in part. And I guess it's good. I can stop talking by remembering her and thinking about how talented she was as a political organizer and leader, and how determined she was, and in my mind, right, to pursue the case with the zeal that she did, and to enlist all her friends. And I think we wound up raising close to $1 million
Almost $1 million.
to finance that case for those several years. I got paid, other people got paid, and we did what we had to do. And once she showed the way, we were on our way, really, so that we kept going after she passed away. And we got this, we were really fortunate in the jury that was picked, and led by Mary Nunn, whose name was mentioned, and she had a little coterie on the jury, with 2 or 3 other women, and the story was that they had led the jury and helped them understand they had to go over all the evidence and decide what they thought of everything. And one thing that happened was that the jurors were given tablets and told they could take notes. And about half of them did take notes, and the other half didn't bother. And then the ones that took the notes won every argument in the deliberations about what the facts had been, what the evidence had been, which was very good for us. But the verdict sheet was broken down into a bunch of questions. Did they violate their First Amendment rights? Did they violate their Fourth Amendment rights? I think there were 8 different questions.
And 77 decisions, I believe, that had to be made.
I put as many lines on the verdict form as I could.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, the main findings of the jury were all clustered around the questions about the First Amendment. In other words, what did they do it, and did they do it in order to suppress their political activities, their free speech activities? And by far the great bulk of those $4 million was awarded in those counts that were about violations, deliberate violations of the First Amendment.
80%.
Mm-hmm.
Is that right? Yeah. That sounds good. That's certainly right. And so that was, something special about the whole process. Even if you leave aside the fact that we won the case, we won it that way. That was deep, because they understood it, and they understood the whole thing. And Mary Nunn made clear. She did a long radio interview, right, with Bernadine?
She did.
And she said, yeah, you were there?
Mm-hmm.
That was a really heartwarming aspect of the case. So I'm going to say that and be through. Like I said yesterday when I talked to this woman, I was shocked already and all this stuff I couldn't remember. And still am. But it was, to me it was, I was involved in some other big cases, the Panther case in Chicago, Connecticut cases, some others. But this was certainly the most successful. Going through all the way to the end, getting that verdict, getting the Wisconsin verdict, getting that money. I've done some other stuff since then, but nothing like that. And it was such a privilege, to work with people who were so dedicated and so determined and so well led. She died in 1957. And the trial only happened in 2002. And everything was done right. Piece by piece, it just kept right on going. And nobody would have quit, based on the commitments they made to her and the commitments she made to them. She can't really explain. So thank you.
Dennis Cunningham. When Judy only had 2 weeks to live, she gave me final instructions as to how to carry on the lawsuit. And she told me the most important thing I could do would be to read the deposition summaries. Two extraordinary things about the deposition summaries. You're taking basically 400 pages of deposition and boiling them down to about 5 pages or so. And one of the extraordinary things was Judy was writing deposition summaries 3 weeks before she passed away. She was so committed to this lawsuit, she was taking it right down to the end until she couldn't do it anymore. But the other extraordinary thing was that not all the deposition summaries were written by Judi Bari. Some of them were written by Alicia Littletree, who went on to become our case manager, meaning she took all the evidence and put it in, organized it into notebooks and files and had it at the ready into multiple huge loose leaf binders. And so I could say many more things, except we did give her the MVP award, Most Valuable Paralegal. Ladies and gentlemen, Alicia Littletree.
Okay, so thanks. There's 3 memories that I want to share of the trial, and one was what Dennis is talking about with when the jury announced their verdict, and they went through each defendant and each charge against them, and we listened, and it was surreal. We were sitting there in this Oakland courtroom. It was like time stopped. We'd been waiting for this verdict for 6 weeks. And we all, was it 3? I remember nothing. Josh? I think it was 6 weeks. It was 6 weeks. I gained like 12 pounds. Just stress eating. So that's not an important detail. Anyway, I remember sitting there next to you just exactly like we are right now. And the judge and the jury, and they're reading it, and as we're getting each of the verdicts, it becomes clear that, yes, we won the Fourth Amendment claims. We won the First Amendment claims. And as soon as the First Amendment claims were read, I looked at Dennis, and Dennis looked at me, and I said, we won. The Fourth Amendment claims, great, but the First Amendment claims, we won this case. They understood that the reason that the Fourth Amendment abuses happened with the unlawful search and seizure and the arrests, that wasn't just done for its own sake. It was done to target their First Amendment activities, their organizing, and the jury got it. But then after you had like the we won moment, then what do? We won. We won. And I don't think to this day it has really sunk in. But we had a job to do. We went downstairs, we talked to the press, and then we partied. We had a big party at one of the supporters' houses. Another moment, well, I can't remember, but I wanted to, no, another moment from the trial was when Judy testified at the trial. That was another surreal moment, right? Because Judy had been dead for 5 years. And we had made sure the month before, 4 weeks before she died, Dennis took Judy's deposition. And Dennis questioned Judy for 2 days to get her testimony on the record, while being harangued by the FBI and Oakland police objecting to break up the flow of it. But they never asked Judy a question, not one question. But I think you got a pretty complete record from Judy. And there was some fighting about what was admissible and what wasn't. And we had to pull out some of the things that Judy said. But by and large, several hours of her testimony was preserved and shown to the jury in her own voice at trial. And to me, that was another moment of victory, where Judy was able in that forum to tell the truth about what she'd experienced and how it had damaged her and damaged the movement that she was building. And we had her ashes there in the courtroom that day too. That was an amazing day. I want to talk about politics in command, which was, I think Judy learned that phrase from you. And that meant that this case was a legal case, yes, but it was a political case, right? So anytime there was a question about legal versus political strategy, Judy would say politics in command. This is about political change. This isn't necessarily just about a legal victory. This is a legal victory to change the power structure that we live under. The other thing that Judy was totally committed to the entire time, one of the few times she actually was really pissed at me, was when, for Judy, this case was not about her. It was about the FBI, and it was about the right of all activists to organize for radical change in this country. And she never talked about her case without centering COINTELPRO, Leonard Peltier and the American Indian Movement, the Black Panther Party and the targets of COINTELPRO, those who were murdered and those who survived but spent large parts of their lives in jail, like Geronimo G. Jaga Pratt, and the Puerto Rican independence movement, who was targeted and jailed. So she never wanted this to be about her. She wanted it to be about activists and their right to organize. And one time I put her name kind of big on a poster, and she was like, "This isn't about me." I mean, she meant it. She didn't. And Larry Evans, when we were here talking about Judy a couple weeks ago, he said she also kind of resented the lawsuit, and I remember that, in that she had to do it. She had to do it. She had to fight back against what had been done to her. But her heart and her focus was in the woods. That was the struggle that she wanted to be fighting. So there was no way. And I remember a conversation between the two of you where she was despairing. Why do I have to be the one? I'm no Geronimo Pratt, I'm no Leonard Peltier. Why do I have to be the one? And of course she acknowledges, because she had a level of privilege, that because of her whiteness, that they were never able to command and use to get into court. But Dennis also said, because you have the benefit of their experience, right? So she really saw herself taking their fight into court as well. And as I said at the last event, she spent, after the diagnosis, she spent a huge amount of the time that she had left getting that case ready for us to take for the next 5 years. But politics in command, also, you don't sue the FBI without having to do the most sophisticated and powerful and relentless organizing outside of court. in order to make it even possible. And when Dennis says that Judy raised, and many of us contributed to raising $1 million, 100 depositions, that's expensive. Transcripts of all of the depositions, all of the case, the lawyer fees and all of that. And Judy had a really strong ethic of paying people for their work as a union organizer. So there was a lot of organizing to keep this case going. It wasn't just a legal fight. And so while I was doing legal work on the case, from the age of 22 to whatever, I was also organizing a lot of the political support. And so pre-trial, it was, depositions and deposition summaries. I read the entire FBI case file and made a spreadsheet of all of the names so that we could search, because we didn't have the ability to scan, for searchable text back then. So, we were just creating these tools that would allow us to manage this much information. And then during the trial, I basically, like Darryl said, I managed that stuff. So every day after trial, I would go through with Josh's transcript, and I would go through what was said and get all of the evidence ready for the next day, and have kind of briefing packets ready for the legal team. And a third memory that I have of the trials when we were getting ready for the actual springtime, after we've been delayed from the October trial date because of 9/11. No, actually, this was in October. This is when Josh and I were working on the evidence books. I had been living at the law office for the year with my dog, Berna. And we were coming up to deadlines, but, Dennis was tracking that. I wasn't tracking deadlines. I was just doing what needed to be done. And he said, okay, well, it's time to get the evidence in. Okay, what do we do with that? Well, all of the testimony we're going to use, all of the photos, all of the physical evidence, all of the videos, all of that needs to be ready, presented to the judge. It's like, whoa, okay, like in binders? Yeah, in binders, and, we have to present it to the judge to, for her to go through and sign off on. Well, I think this was like Monday or something, and you said, I said, well, when does this have to be? And he said, in a week. Next Monday. What? So, do you remember that?
I do remember that.
And Jamie. The three of us, the Kinko's crew, the Kinko's staff knew us very well. Probably most of our budget. Anyway, we did it. We got all that evidence compiled and submitted. We just weren't gonna stop. Nothing was gonna keep us from doing it. So we also had an incredible legal team, an amazing legal team. Dennis, Bill Simpich, Tony Serra, Bob Bloom, and then all of the activists who turned into paralegals to help. And Ben, who was an actual lawyer, but also an activist. So this just amazing little army of people who during the trial were there 24/7. I also want to mention, because it wouldn't be accurate to not mention this, that we had a disinformation campaign and a disruption campaign during the years leading up to the trial. We had, I believe our legal team was, we had a really hard time. I've never seen people fight that much, and including Dennis was fired from the case, and we had to fight like hell to get him back on the case. Our legal team itself was disrupted, or something. I don't know, but the fighting was crazy. We almost lost our legal team. And we managed to, the reason I was living at the law office was because at a certain point, our support group split off from the legal team, and we lost access to most of our funding, right? So we just had to crawl our way to the finish line. And there was also a very public disinformation campaign in the years leading up to the trial, led by someone who we believe pretty concretely is a police informant and sent a couple of the documents in the case. But he was here in Mendocino County working with a bunch of people doing public forums on why Judi Bari hadn't been targeted by timber, but was actually the victim of a domestic violence dispute, and her ex-husband was truly the person who had done it, and everybody knew it. Well, that was bogus, completely bogus. and you don't hear from those people anymore, but leading up to the trial, here in Mendocino County, that was ground zero for a very aggressive disinformation campaign meant to sever us from our local support, because of course, we couldn't do this without all of the people who were supporting the trial. There was no way we could have done this without everybody's help for 11 years. So we did a lot of political organizing around the case, always connecting it with the history of COINTELPRO. Judy did a bunch of speaking tours, I did a bunch of speaking tours, Darryl was always on the road. A lot of media. Judy set up a nonprofit 501c3 called Redwood Justice Fund, and the project of Redwood Justice Fund was Redwood Summer Justice Project, and that was how all of the, if you're ever thinking about doing a big lawsuit of this kind, those were the sort of building blocks she put in place. There was one really, really, really big hurdle that we had to get over, which was called qualified immunity, because police have special immunity. They can't just make mistakes in the course of their behavior. They have to be doing it knowingly, maliciously, and deliberately.
They have to be doing it in the teeth of a decision that such a thing was wrong.
Uh-huh.
A judicial decision.
Oh, right.
Precedent.
Okay. So Dennis is like
They still
one of the foremost leaders of the fight against qualified immunity. So, he was definitely the person that won the appeals on that issue when it went up to the
we did the big brief.
big brief. The big brief.
The big brief.
Speak in the mic.
Certainly a copy of Big Brief there.
The big brief we put together toward the end was a motion for a ruling that none of the defendants had qualified immunity. And we just assembled a lot of, most of the evidence, I suppose.
Yeah.
And she says, what is this, a preemptive strike? Just what it was.
The whole case
Worked out pretty good.
documented. So that issue is still an extremely serious and important issue in cases like George Floyd's murder. This is what keeps police from being held accountable in these egregious cases. And everyone's wondering, like, why can't we convict police for misconduct? Well, it's qualified immunity, and it's only gotten more and more entrenched and difficult. A higher hurdle to get over as police advocate for more and more protections for their bad behavior. So we had to get over that hurdle. I want to talk a little bit about the aftermath of Judy's case and maybe like what it meant or what it means. For one thing, what it means is that we can do this, right? Judy's case, like Dennis said, it was successful. It was an incredible victory. I feel like it was overshadowed somewhat by 9/11. And that what should have felt to me like a victory lap, like I thought people would take a lot more interest in the case, right? This is one of the first events in the years after the case where we're really talking about what it was and what happened in showing that car. And there was a whole lot of trauma from everybody who was anywhere close to this case. And so a lot of us had a lot of just healing to do, afterwards, and maybe didn't have the heart. I used to say I didn't have the heart to just like go on another speaking tour to talk about that we won, which I regret. I regret that I couldn't do that, but I just couldn't. And the other thing that happened was right after Judy's case, there was, and I don't know much about this because I was like receding and having a kid, and I wasn't involved anymore. I had to go away. But there was a serious attack against the environmental movement by the FBI through the Green Scare. And so a lot of environmental groups were targeted, but they were targeted in a different way, I think, than how Judy was targeted. They didn't go after like one charismatic, prominent leader. They went after people who maybe weren't as central, and then they, got people to turn against each other. And that was happening in the aftermath. And of course, the Patriot Act was passed, and a lot of the things that we were able to sue the FBI for in this case were no longer illegal. So that was a big shift. But I also think that, and I've thought this forever, that Judy's case is like a test case in a community, in a small micro version of what we then saw happen later on, more recently, with as the social media got more and more sort of ubiquitous in our lives, and the use of disinformation and lies about social movements and politics just became completely malignant and metastasized to everything, right? And you can see the same tactics. Like Judy discovered that the FBI's tactics of COINTELPRO were privatized here, and the timber companies were using those tactics of COINTELPRO. Well, then you see this like just explosion of these tactics fueled by the way that social media can exacerbate it all, and then we find ourselves in 2016, you know, just wondering what end is up. And it was just like a flashback, but on such a scale, on such a huge scale. So these tactics have never gone away. In fact, they've continued to grow and be used to damaging, devastating effects against activists, against social movements. And I think that Judy really taught us a lot about how to stand up to them. And it has a lot to do with the way that she was relentless and her ability to make things clear and communicate, to use evidence and to analyze evidence and then make it accessible to people, and to never back down. But the thing that I appreciated so much about her was her moral clarity. You know, it was like she never pulled her punches. She was always, clear about what was going on and who was responsible for it, and she went right there, right to their doorstep. So I guess that's what I want to leave us with, is that the case is still very current for us today, even though it was 30 years ago. And I think that her case is a real tool for us as we move forward on how to stand up to this kind of disinformation and how to win.
Alicia, Littletree, bales on trees, so they go ahead and limb trees up. They're hovering over people's property. Ironically, occasionally cutting a tree here and there. The other vocation that Earth Firsters get into is law. They become lawyers.
And firefighter.
Yes, and so our next speaker is one who chose law as his profession. I was there in Colorado when he was locked down to Amico's office, and he's done a number of arrest actions. He when he was with our legal team back in the year 2002, we used to call him Young Ben, and now he's Old Gray Ben Rosenfeld. Ben Rosenfeld, who has really helped us quite a bit over the years. Thank you, Ben.
Darryl wasn't kidding when he says he writes a song about everything. What Darryl didn't know when he was writing a song about when I was locked by the neck with a U-lock to the Amico depot in Colorado after a rendezvous, is that I had the key to that lock hidden on my person, because I had long since figured out personally, in fact I figured it out the moment I first locked down to heavy equipment, that I was really honestly too chicken shit to be an Earth Firster. I valued my neck too much, I guess, and so I always had the key hidden on my person somewhere. That's in a nutshell why I became a lawyer. Segued, from being an Earth First activist into becoming a lawyer.
So lawyers are chicken shit?
Where's the key now?
Bursting is harder.
Right, but at the same time, and what I want to talk about, and what I think we're all here to celebrate, is that this lawsuit, this ongoing case, is in every way, not just metaphorically, but literally, the Earth First legal action. And we have, as you've heard today, and as most of you already know, this case has been pursued, it's been maintained, it was won, and it continues to live on, specifically because it has been approached as an action. I mean, the way the case was done fits symbiotically with the way Earth First operates. I mean, you know, you have it drilled into your head in law school that you owe this duty of zealous representation to your individual client, the rest of the world be damned, right? This is how the law is supposed to function in this sort of ivory tower sense. And so what that means is you get a lot of on-high lawyers, sometimes even movement lawyers, who don't want to hear from the community. They don't want to hear from defense committee or, you know, in our case, plaintiff committee supporters. They don't want to hear from you. I mean, they don't want to hear from, you know, what they consider to be the sort of, you know, noisy, interfering rabble who just doesn't understand that specialized social science of the law. And that's, of course, the exact opposite from the way we did this case, and that's why we won, and that's why we're here. We're still here today. And so I've personally been loving the kind of give and take and the call and response that we've been doing today, because it's a reminder of that, and it's reinforcing of that, and it means we still got it. I see a lot of great shirts representing. Mine is the angry red squirrel, which was it's a threatened squirrel that lives on Mount Graham and became sort of an Earth First, you know, totem or celebrated animal. I'm not sure we're supposed to use the word totem. Hi, baby. What's that?
He likes squirrels.
Okay, good. You're a squirrel liker? Well, see, that makes you a very special Earth First doggy. And this is the shirt that I ritualistically wear when I'm waiting for a jury to come back. I wore it every day. I think I probably washed it occasionally, but I wore it continuously while we were waiting for the jury to come back in the Judi Bari case. This is actually a reissued copy of this shirt. You guys can. It was out of print for a little while, but you can get it again. And we all know that terrorists express themselves through pithy T-shirt slogans and folk songs. I said terrorists, by the way, not terrorists. So this case is the Earth First legal action, and I mean it would not have succeeded but for you, literally. I mean, you know, this is not one of these sort of obligatory person behind the dais saying thank you to the crowd. I mean, it can't be overstated. I mean, everybody here in this room has some powerful connection to this subject matter, to the people involved. I mean, just looking around, it would take too long to list the contributions of everybody. But I mean, everybody that showed up to a rally, you know, that did the work in the community, that kept the oral tradition of it going. That gave money, certainly, but you know, that was only one ingredient that made this case work and win. This case is the exception to every single rule in civil rights law, and I've continued to do civil rights work, you know, since this case. And I remember the day we won, a lawyer named Jim Wheaton, who became our what we called fee counsel, and kind of the guy that did a lot of the negotiations and settlement discussions, which were very complicated after this case. Because, by the way, when you win a case, you don't really win. You know, nothing in law ever really comes to an end, it seems. I mean, it's utterly fatiguing, right? You're asymptotically approaching some end game. All winning really does is it just improves your negotiating position, right? Because then we had to, you know, we celebrated, we certainly did, and then I went back to work the next day writing victory away from us, asking the judge to set it aside, and you can't take any of that for granted. So you don't really, you know, a case almost never really wins. And I always tell my potential clients, and especially the ones who call and say, I got a slam dunk civil rights case and it's going to make you rich. Well, there's no such thing, of course. And by the way, as a side note, you know, for anybody, and I don't think there's anybody here in this crowd who thinks this, you know, but for the sort of Bruce Andersons of the world, if you think this case made anybody rich, if you think this case made Dennis rich, go look at his jalopy in the driveway. And I say that lovingly. But you know, the righteous, it's a different jalopy. The righteous case is not the winnable case, especially when the protagonists of the case are us, you know, our activists, our people who jurors don't, you know, jurors are not of our peers. Jurors are almost never of the peers of the person on trial or in court, you know. And so I tell people a good protest is not always a good case make. This case is the exception to the rule, and it's the exception to the rule 100% because of the investment and the sustaining energy and effort of a community, an active community, a community of born leaders, really, who kept it alive and didn't let it die and kept it living in the conscience of the community and the wider community. And yes, we put some people forward to be leaders, because that's what leaders also do. They sometimes subordinate themselves to the leadership of people who have relative different spheres of expertise or influence or training in a community. I mean, that's also what it is to be a leader. But any of us could be exchanged on this panel for any of you talking about other spheres of influence and energy and leadership and success, or specifically contributions you've made to this entire case, this entire ongoing project, because after all, we still don't know who bombed Judi Bari and this Earth First legal action. And also I was thinking a little bit while Dennis was talking about this sort of interesting phenomenon today that's so much on display, where at kind of the moment in history, at least within anybody's kind of lifetime or memory, when so much information is available to us and at our fingertips, when truth and fact should be so readily available, digitized, and instantly available, for some odd reason we're living in a world where truth is so incredibly under assault. And so I was trying to sort of wrap these things together a little bit, and I was thinking, Dennis got up here and he kind of lamented to you in this extremely disarming and accessible way how much of the kind of nitty-gritty details of the case are starting to leave. And I was thinking about how perishable knowledge is. And Dennis still has an amazing ken and trap for the information of this case. After all, I think everybody would agree. Yeah, Dennis's dog's names are kind of. But at the same time, and what the call and response we've been doing, humorously illustrates, is that no single person is the repository of all of the incredible voluminous information of this case, except for maybe Josh, as you'll learn in a moment. But Josh has been actively living with it too, where some of us have been doing other things or letting it go. It's an active, ongoing project for Josh in a different kind of way. But even Josh would tell you that he hasn't lassoed all of the information in this case, right? And and just to riff off that for a moment too, even though we all have our theories about what happened, and a lot of our theories, here and in this room tend to cohere. I mean, I think we all, for example, agree that this has all of the hallmarks of a COINTELPRO action by the FBI. A separate question, by the way, from who actually carried out the bombing, but we would at least, I think, mostly agree this is a latter-day COINTELPRO operation. All you need to do, really, there's a lot of people who are perfectly well-intentioned who've had other theories about this case, but they might be missing one tiny little piece of information. They might have gotten a fact wrong. Something new might develop. Just as Dennis told you, that when he sat with this material, it came to him like a revelation that that Reichs had no reason to be leaving that high-powered meeting with Gorbachev. And any of us, I think, have similar stories to impart to you about how you sit again with the same information, you pore over the same details, you slog through the same files, or you get one new kernel, or you learn that something you relied on because you heard somebody else say it, but you didn't verify it for yourself, was wrong or new or different, and it sparks something new, or it slightly alters your theory. So, knowledgeable is perishable and always has been for the most innocent of human reasons, and for the fundamental reason that, we have this natural human tropism, this penchant for conveying information through storytelling, through narrative, And so we, without even thinking about it, we're connecting pieces and dots of information through our own narrative understanding and experience, and that's how we talk about and tell the case. Little by little, hopefully and gradually, the truth emerges. For some mystifying reason, so much of this case still is enshrouded in fog and mystery. And until something breaks through, we're still awaiting that deathbed confession, maybe by somebody who might have already died or might not ever deliver that confession. Or maybe we do know, there's probably noise in the data and outlying information. There's probably several puzzles to follow because after all, Judy, as Dennis said lovingly, and as we all know, had a big mouth, and that's why she was such a threat to the powers that be. And so she had enemies. I mean, she had, of course, adoring friends and supporters and co-organizers, but she had more than one enemy, so there's probably more than one puzzle. We're here trying to fit it all together in one seamless whole. If we ever figure out who done it, pin the tail on the donkey, fit the DNA evidence we have to an actual person, all of this will collapse into an actual ordered, clear narrative, and within that narrative there will be noisy data and outlying pieces of information, people that behaved irrationally when you expected them to be rational, or behaved, or acted out of emotion as opposed to out of, rational thought. But until that time, and even if that time never arrives, it's so hugely important to keep alive the oral history and tradition of this case, and that includes the artistic history, the museum history, the musical history, and all the histories that everybody collectively tells about this story, because it's not enough to digitize it. It's not enough to have created these indices and repositories of information which we live with, and Alicia's absolutely right. I mean, the information management of this case was a phenomenal and august task and undertaking as the digitizing of information was still coming into being. I mean, I remember late nights with Dennis and a one-pass copy machine when we were in production trying to file a motion or respond to one, and it was an undertaking just to collate those pieces of paper and not get them out of order. Bill Simpich had to join us for all-nighters to do that. So we were doing information management in this case as the whole science of information management was evolving, and yet, and still, and despite all of that, there is no agreed upon, totally revealed, ironclad, accepted, universal history of this case and this tragedy and victory, this saga. All knowledge is perishable. The knowledge, it's not just Dennis's knowledge, not just our knowledge as we get older and move on. The knowledge of this entire case is perishable, and the loss of it would be a loss to humanity, and it would be dangerous. And that's why I come full circle and say that the work that we collectively do in this Earth First action, the legal action, the work that all of you have done and continue to do, and continue to talk about it and keep it alive and pass it on, is so immensely important.
Thank you.
Our last presenter, before we do a little bit of Q&A, is Josh Morsell. But before I introduce Josh Morsell, in case any of you need to leave early, I want to make two quick announcements, and then we'll bring Josh on. One of them is that we do have various tables over here, including the Friends of the Mendocino County Museum, who's helping to raise money for lodging and other expenses that have been incurred. They paid for the motel rooms for two of our presenters last week, and depending upon whether Dennis and company want to stay in Willits, they're raising money for that, as well as for videography and other expenses, which are many. And we also have, for donation only, no prices attached, we have a whole bunch of, we have Who Bombed Judi Bari movies and some music CDs from yours truly over there, and some Judi Bari buttons. It's just whatever you want, including free. Okay, so just right over there, any amount. And then Karen Pickett, for a mere $12, is selling the 40th anniversary Earth First Journal, a definite collector's item, and some Earth First Green Anarchist t-shirts with the circle and the fist and the green and the black. So, and Who Bombed Judi Bari t-shirts as well. So don't forget to come up to our tables later. I also have a very special announcement to make about the next presentation, which will be on the 20th of October. That's a week from this Wednesday, so it's 10 days from now, October 20th. the founder and director of the Mendocino Environmental Center, Betty Ball, will be here at the podium to talk about the day of the bombing. Along with myself, Karen Pickett, and Agnes Patak from K-Mud as well. Betty Ball will be joining us, and she's flying all the way from Colorado. So, and she's going to be spending quite a number of days in the area to take, a vacation. And Betty, like a lot of us, is not getting any younger. So this will be quite the opportunity to spend some time with Betty. I'm very, very amazed. And you know what she said? You just can't miss this. The Mendocino County Museum has given us an event here, an exhibit that was really not to be missed. So many people have followed this case but didn't get to the trial and have not seen the bomb car. My daughter, 9 years old, has never got to see the bomb car until last week when she came for the music event. Carrie Reynolds, Abby's mom, has never seen the bomb car. And so many of you have not seen the bomb car. And so thank you to the Mendocino County Museum for making that controversial but really essential display, part of the history of Mendocino County, California, and in fact the world. So thank you. Josh, wonderful video guy, video editor. Really, when Judi Bari gave her deposition to the jury, it was a tearjerker. And I know that Alicia helped Josh in the editing of that, but Josh was the man who put it together, as well as listed every single day, which was no small feat. In fact, Josh was so accurate in his transcriptions of the trial that I just wondered, if he didn't have a little secret tape recorder in his back pocket to get everything down. But without any further ado, a man who knows so much and is writing a book, has written a book, is trying to hawk it to somebody, somewhere.
It's such an honor and a pleasure to be on this panel with you guys. So, years ago, in the months before the lawsuit went to trial, Alicia and Dennis hired me to edit several bits of video footage that we were going to show to the jury. And then I ended up staying on and working as a legal assistant on the case, and then worked for Dennis for several years as a legal assistant after that. A wonderful time in my life. And has been alluded to, I then did also write a book about the case, which is substantially done. At the time, I thought, the Darryl and the legal team and others have done such extraordinary investigation on this already, and they've organized it. And I'm a fast writer, and I'm gonna write this book in a year. And it is a hard and complex subject, and totally absorbing. And I'm still working on it. But I've substantially written the book, and I'm looking for a publisher, so stay tuned. But I'm going to zoom in on some of the details of the case, focusing on some of the work that I did with the video. There are several types of video that Alicia and I edited together. There was news footage of the bombing. There was footage of Judy doing her work, Judy organizing the field, and there was Judy's deposition. And there are just a few things that stand out in my memory from that time that I want to share with you. So the news footage, we assembled a compilation of footage of the bombing spanning from the day of the explosion to 7 weeks later when the district attorney announced that he was not going to press charges against Darryl and Judy. And something that emerged pretty clearly upon watching this footage over and over again in chronological order was that law enforcement was weaponizing the media against Judy and Darryl. Mm-hmm. On day one, we have a reporter standing in front of the car saying, "The FBI is here, and they are interested in the injured couple, who are leaders of the eco-terrorist group Earth First, which has vowed to step up vandalism this summer to stop redwood harvesting." Now, you may know that Darryl and Judy had expressly vowed not to commit vandalism that summer. So this was an unfair characterization, and it sounds like it was fed to the reporter by the FBI. The next day, the Oakland police hold a press conference, and they announce that the victims of the car bombing are now the suspects in the case. Our local reporter, Mike Janella, asks, well, they've been receiving death threats, haven't they? Are you considering anyone else as a possible suspect? And the police say, no, we don't think the death threats are connected, and we have no information to indicate that anyone else is involved. And then end the press conference. That was Lieutenant Sims, who was running the investigation for the Oakland Police Department. So And then over the next 7 weeks, there's a steady drip of damaging statements from law enforcement to the press. And this, of course, is happening at the same time that Redwood Summer is picking up steam, and Redwood Summer is getting coverage. And it's competing. You know, there are these headlines that are saying Judy and Darryl are terrorists, and that's competing with and undermining the Redwood Summer message about the trees and about nonviolence. And then, after 7 weeks of this, the district attorney says, the evidence is insufficient to secure a conviction. I'm not going to charge Darryl and Judy. And at this point, and in fact, years later, one of the FBI agents on the case testified in trial, there never was any evidence of any kind to suggest that Darryl and Judy were transporting that bomb knowingly. Yet, when the DA says, I'm not going to charge, there's not good enough evidence, the FBI and the Oakland police made television appearances to clarify to everybody, no, Darryl and Judy are still suspects. They have not been cleared. They are the only suspects, and our investigation is continuing. So they may not have been able to complete the frame-up in court, but they were able to continue the frame-up in the public eye through statements they made to the press. And now I'll leap over to another type of footage that we dealt with was the footage of Judy doing her work, her organizing. And there's a particular clip I remember we used that stands out. It was in 1989, an action at Redwood House Road in Humboldt County. I think Darryl was doing a tree sit at the time. The footage that we used was Judy on the ground talking to some loggers, and she called them her captive audience because, of course, you guys stop them from working and they don't have anything to do but talk to you. And she's saying, we're not here against the loggers, we're here against Charles Hurwitz, the owner of Pacific Lumber. He's got you working, 58 hours a week? You guys are milling your children's jobs. That mill's going to be closed in a generation. It's not your fault. It's Hurwitz's fault. And now it's not that the loggers, leapt to Judy's side in that moment, but you can see them, and they're nodding, and they're looking her in the eye, and they're having a conversation with them, and she's establishing a rapport and a basis of trust with them. And you can see Judy finding this approach of this kind of trustworthy confrontation, where she's going to be uncompromising and tell the hard truths, but she's establishing a trust that can be a basis for negotiations across political divides in the community so that the whole community can start to make some changes that are needed, that are hard, around how the Redwood resource is going to be used. And you can see that if she had been running around furtively planting bombs that could have injured these loggers, it would have destroyed that trust. So the work that she was doing was totally opposed to the bombing that she was accused of. And then the third type of footage that Alicia and I edited was Judy's deposition, which, Judy's live testimony should have been a centerpiece of the trial, and we know that she didn't live that long, sadly. And as Alicia mentioned, she gave her deposition a month before she died, and you can tell in the video footage that she's very sick. She's lying on the pillow, and she's got big circles under her eyes, but she's totally lucid, and gives powerful and devastating testimony. And she's under oath to tell the truth. And you would think that this would be a great opportunity for the opposing counsel to ask her some hard questions, to dig up some dirt, to impeach her credibility, to reveal that she really is the terrorist that their clients claim she was. Instead, as Alicia said, they spent their energy interrupting Judy and Dennis as much as they could with objections. It seemed like their strategy was, she's sick, let's tire her out, let's make it hard for her to complete a sentence. She overcame that. She was clear. She was lucid. And when it came time for them to ask her those questions that could have damaged her credibility in theory, they didn't ask her a single question. Not one. Which is very striking. Now, I guess something that I'd like to really conclude with here is just the thought that we'd all like to know who bombed her, of course, and there are a lot of very interesting theories about it, and a lot of very interesting information supporting these theories. So far, the theories are all inconclusive to my mind. I think that we must be missing some important information, some puzzle pieces that would make it all add up. A question that is just about as interesting as who bombed Judy, though, is why don't we know who bombed Judy yet? Why have we not been able to solve this case after all these years? And the lawsuit did a lot of work toward answering that question. And in short, I think the findings of the lawsuit are, well, the FBI locked up the evidence. The FBI did not conduct key basic tests like fingerprint comparisons and DNA comparisons. And when Darryl and the legal team fought to try to get access to that evidence so that they can conduct the tests, the FBI fought them on it. And the FBI conducted a bogus investigation. They didn't even try to figure out who sent death threats to Judy and Darryl. And all this time, the trail is growing cold. The bomber is getting farther away. You know, this is a sprawling, complex case involving an entire community that was at war with itself. Of course, there are going to be a lot of false leads. There's going to be a lot to run down. It required a well-resourced professional investigation, the sort that the FBI could have done if they had wanted to, and they chose not to. And they didn't even compare Darryl and Judy's fingerprints and DNA to the fingerprints and DNA on the bomb evidence, which is really strange if Darryl and Judy were the prime suspects. It makes you wonder, you know, did the FBI think that that would exonerate them? Did the FBI not want to know what the answer was? You know, or if they did do those comparisons, they buried the documentation because it never turned up. So, you know, it really looks like the FBI was not pursuing justice, was not trying to solve the case, but was trying to frame Darryl and Judy. And that is, of course, what the jury found in their verdict. Now, Dennis mentioned, or I think it was Dennis, that most of the damages awarded in this case were for First Amendment violations, you know, which is an acknowledgement by the jury that the FBI was trying to interfere with Darryl and Judy's political speech. It was, you know, an act of political repression. Now, still, we might ask, but why? Why would they do that? And to my knowledge, no FBI agent has ever given us a satisfying answer. So we can speculate. But something interesting that we do know is, you know, it's been mentioned, Dennis mentioned that there was this FBI investigation of Earth First and environmentalists associated with Earth First in Arizona immediately preceding the bombing case. And in that case, the FBI was actively trying to get the environmentalists to use bombs. There was a file in that case, an FBI file, where the Phoenix office of the FBI was asking headquarters for permission to extend the undercover operation, to let the undercover agent, Mike Fain, keep working for longer undercover. And they mentioned in there a nationwide effort to eradicate the leadership of the radical environmental movement. Eradicate is the word they use. And in that Arizona case, they end up arresting this group of activists that had been goaded by the undercover agent into attempting an act of eco-sabotage. They also arrested Dave Foreman, the founder of Earth First, you know, maybe the most prominent leader of Earth First at that time. And he really only had a very tenuous connection to the eco-sabotage. In fact, the undercover agent, Mike Fain, was recorded on tape by accident. He forgot to turn off the hidden recording device he had on him. And he says, you know, Foreman really isn't the guy that we need to bust in terms of the actual perpetrator. He's the guy we need to pop to send a message, and that's all we're really doing.
Oh boy, don't want that on tape.
Yeah, and then he says, oh boy, we don't want that on tape. But it was on tape. So, you know, they get Foreman. And then along comes Judy and a bomb explodes in her car. And it's an opportunity to finally really associate an Earth Firster with explosives and neutralize another prominent leader of the movement. And they jump on it, you know, and there are questions about whether the FBI had foreknowledge of the bombing and was complicit, and that's a fascinating topic. And, you know, but clearly they were pointed in a, you know, at the moment the bomb exploded, the FBI was already pointed in a direction of eradicating the leadership of the radical environmental movement. And a number of the important FBI agents who worked on the bombing, on the Judy and Darryl bombing investigation, they had worked on the Arizona case also. They were following leads in the Bay Area for that case. So they'd already been working on this in this vein, on this project of eradicating the leadership. And then this was a golden opportunity. As Dennis used in his opening statement. It was a golden opportunity for them to neutralize these Earth First leaders. So maybe I'll leave it there. and we can open it up to Q&A.
Fantastic. Josh, yourself. Very nice picture.
Just real quick, also for people that want to dig a little deeper into some of the documentary evidence, there is a website that has been maintained for all these years by the wonderful Nick Wilson here. It's judibari.org, right?
Yes.
Okay. Anyway, there's a website, there are documents, and it's a great repository.
And whobombeddjudibari.com, the website for the movie. I want to say just a couple final words before we open it up, and that is about how do we get our money? How do we actually get paid? Now, there's, sometimes it says Gilbert and Sullivan used to sing or write to be sung by the D'Oyly Carte Opera Company. Things are seldom what they seem. And when Judge Claudia Wilkin threw out defendant after defendant off the case, so many of the people who we felt were pretty guilty were dismissed from being charged by us, and we were left with 7 defendants, 6 of whom were found guilty, by the way, or liable, as the case is, in civil trials. But what that did, when she threw them off the case, she allowed us the opportunity to appeal their dismissal from the case. But you're only allowed to appeal a dismissal of someone after the case is completed. So now that the case was completed and we won, we had the ability to bring Special Agent in Charge Richard Held back into the case by appealing his dismissal.
Yeah.
And the Supervisor Webb out in Washington, D.C., bringing him back into the case. And if we had won any of those appeals, we would have had a whole second trial. And the FBI chose not to have a second trial, not to take that chance. And that is how we were, in fact, awarded our funds. By the way, another way we were awarded our funds is I actually lobbied the Oakland City Council as well as Mayor Jerry Brown at the time to allow us to get our money. I still remember that dinner I had with Jerry Brown, sushi dinner, and I met him in Oakland, and I got out of my car and there was Jerry Brown running up and down the street going, "Dharma, Dharma, Dharma." That was the name of his dog that had escaped off the leash, and he was trying to get back into his car. And we closed out a sushi place that night, and I also met with Councilmember Nadell, who said to me, "Well, if we pay you the money for this case, do you know how many teachers we're going to have to lay off?" And I said, "You should have thought about that when you blamed us in the first place." But the bottom line is that effort went in, and one other thing that we did before we took a reduced amount of money was I insisted, much to Dennis Cunningham's dismay, may I say, I insisted on 2 other additional non-monetary damages. One, that they give us all the evidence when they were done with us so that we could analyze it, so that we had it in our possession. And the second was that Oakland make May 24th Judi Bari Day, which they did. And I was allowed to come to the Oakland City Council and receive a plaque announcing Judi Bari Day as May 24th. When I actually made that demand, Joe Scher, I think you were there, Joe Scher kind of stuck his head, the Department of Justice attorney raised his head and said, "Well, do we need to make it a national holiday too?"
Good idea.
She would kill us.
I said, "No, we'll take the Oakland holiday." Since that time, the city of Arcata has made May 24th Judi Bari Day, and the county of Mendocino has made May 24th Judi Bari Day. So it's a movement. With that, I will open this up to Q&A if you have any. And it is actually 3:03. Technically, our time is up, but I think we can go on a little bit longer. And also, if you got here late and you haven't seen the exhibit, please be sure to go and see the exhibit. It's really amazing.
Thank you so much for your commitment. I remember when I was filming the trial, I remember Dennis saying that in his incredible successful career, you never had a client that knew so much more about a case than you did. I remember you saying that. And also, Darryl doesn't like me to praise him too much.
I don't.
But Darryl's mother was at the trial. And I was filming, and I went up to her and I said, she came from Manhattan, where Darryl's from. And I said, "Mrs. Cherney, when did you know that Darryl was going to be a great leader of the Western world? And she said to me, well, when he was a kid, he used to organize all the kids in the neighborhood and have different theater pieces and stuff. And she was really proud of me. Anyway, I just thought I'd throw that in.
Thank you for keeping that short.
I'm kind of curious, how did a pro Judi Bari woman get onto the jury? How was she allowed onto the jury? Didn't anybody ask questions before?
Jurors were questioned, and many were excused. Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay, I can bend.
Elevator up.
There was a voir dire process. They were all questioned, and I think Mary Nunn was the last one on, right? Left on? Seems to me. Anyway, you just go back and forth. You have so many bumps, people you can excuse without giving a reason. And you can give a reason and then you fight about the reason. If there's a valid reason, the judge will excuse them. It doesn't cost you one of your challenges. But she was part, it was a kind of a remarkable group that was brought in the room, you know, and they're just jurors. And, but she didn't really betray any kind of partiality, I don't think, or any grounds to excuse her for cause. So we got lucky. We had an excellent, probably world-renowned jury consultant, a person who makes a living from helping people get jurors and also get their witnesses ready to deal with jurors. And she guided us through that process.
Can I add something to that?
Choosing them, yeah.
Mary looked incredibly straight sitting in the jury box. Like really severe, hair pulled back, looked very stern librarian-like, you know. When she showed up at KMUD to do the radio interview with Bear, she had this colorful shirt on and her hair down. She looked like somebody might show up at KMUD. I mean, it was a whole other vibe. Just saying.
I will also.
I appreciate her so much.
The last day she wore a camo skirt.
Yes. I will also say that Mary Nunn is a devout Christian. She probably knew nothing about Judi Bari before the trial. And one thing that Mary Nunn, I don't recall if she said this on KMUD or whether she said it to me personally, is that our side didn't need to offer a single bit of testimony, that the FBI was so obviously lying, as well as the Oakland police, that nothing we said really added to the fact that they were guilty of violating our civil rights.
Yeah. And another thing that I said, I think that's really important, was how much it meant having people show up every day during the trial. She said there were some jurors that went, don't these people have jobs? And she said, these people know what's more important, and that's coming to court to support this case. And the other
The audience
thing
made an influence on her.
about Mary Nunn is she's married to a black man and lived in black neighborhoods where she watched the police totally oppress black people. So it was not a shock to her that the cops and the FBI were doing it.
And it says an incredible amount about not judging a book by its cover too, because we were actually, to be completely honest about it, we were a little bit afraid of Mary Nunn because wasn't she the juror who worked for American Airlines?
She worked for
And
American
this was
Airlines.
so soon after the Twin Tower bombing, and American Airlines was one of the hijacked planes. She was a ticket agent. We had gotten this postponement, but this was still so much, in everybody's consciousness. We really had to deliberate about whether to keep Mary Nunn on that jury. You just never know. And yes, she was with us, but as Dennis said, not in a bias. They all had to be with us because the verdict had to be unanimous. But she definitely fought for us in there.
Back row.
Yes, just a couple of quick things. I just really want to underscore what an incredible leader Judi Bari was in the tradition of Malcolm and Martin and Medgar Evers and other people who also were targeted because of the effectiveness with which they led and could speak to a cross-section. And but what I really want to say is, when my daughter, who was teaching at Cornell, she's now at Brown, so I understand this Brown connection, she did a whole class at my suggestion on COINTELPRO. And one of the things that is really striking is the intergenerational disconnect. And in the context of May 24th and in the context of young people, environmentalists, climate change people now being in the streets, is there any way that we can, KCYX, and kind of revisit the church committee hearings?
Ooh, what a good idea.
And, you know, with your expertise, kind of have dialogues that connect it to what's happening now. I won't belabor the point, but I have, somebody gave me who I should, you know, I mean, I just feel like the time is now, Judy's voice is now, the young people are needing to hear it now.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I was just struck by two words that Josh mentioned: neutralize and eradicate. And following up on the comment that was just made now, to connect the dots between the Judi Bari evidence and what happened to her with what's still happening and what we know is going on with FBI and the post 9/11 erosion of our civil rights. So somehow it's a bigger picture, and this is a wonderful. It's like a hologram. You take what happened here, but then you connect it with what's happening elsewhere and continuing, and we just need more and more of that to come to light.
Right.
Thank you for what you've done to do that.
Yeah, and there are new media projects on that. Sorry.
That was one of the reasons why I wanted to bring up the disinformation campaign locally, because I felt like there was a very, very concerted effort to just destroy her memory, so that people coming down the line couldn't turn back and realize what she had to offer them. So I think that's also one of our jobs, is to talk about the truth of what was done to her, and definitely make sure to confront, or at least contextualize, the disinformation campaign for what it was. That, you know, she's a significant person.
And I was just going to say really quickly, just to synthesize those two last comments and questions, there are new media projects underway, and so there is a new opportunity to make those linkages and to reintroduce that subject and those connections to another generation.
Okay.
Thank you all for showing up and doing this, and thank you, Darryl, for putting it together. I was at the trial, and I drew every day. I missed one morning when I got a ticket. But that was the one day that Tom Yates showed up and drew the one witness that I missed. So the trial was drawn, and I'm working with Josh on that one. But I brought copies of a lot of the drawings, and I talked with the people here at the museum earlier, and we'll figure out some place to show them if anybody's interested in looking at them afterwards.
Right on.
Good.
Nicholas.
I'm recalling that when we interviewed jurors after the verdict was released, that one of the things they said was one of the most stunning things that moved them was the compilation of news coverage of the time that made it perfectly obvious that they were just, shoveling disinformation about Judy and Darryl and trying to amp it up and keep this drumbeat of false claims, of false finding of evidence, matching nails in Judy's cabin and blah, 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 just one after the other. They kept it going for 6 weeks until the district attorney finally said, "I'm not going to file charges." But that was a masterful job of compiling the media coverage.
Well, Judy did that.
Well,
We just put together what she
She
had
did a
already
great job.
analyzed.
And after all those headlines, that article was on page 7. I have the article.
Right, they won the case. Was
A little down below the fold.
I also want to thank you all so much, each and every one of you and Darryl, for organizing these events. It is just so timely. This is a hand of the goddess, what we call it, the timing, because we're involved in this very intense campaign in Jackson State Forest, which, by the way, is a state forest. It's a statewide issue here. And I see people here from the coast who have been super active in that that campaign. And I really want to encourage more inland people to get involved. Check out the information at our table. I know inland has been super involved with many, many other very important issues, but we need you. And we have a tradition here of going to where the big trees are and also where the little trees are. And that's what we have in Jackson. We have 50,000 acres to save there from really the ravages of the same timber industry that bombed Judi Bari. So we're now in a phase of this campaign where we are facing more violence. There's been a marked increase in violence. They're actually hiring goons out there, and I call them that because that is what they are. CAL FIRE said that they wouldn't have any armed or unarmed security in the state forest. They are. They are hiring Lear Security Assets Management.
MRC was doing
So-called, well, MRC always hired them, and HRC and Humboldt has hired them for a long time.
But wasn't MRC logging in there?
No, well,
MRC
no.
being Mendocino Redwood
Mendocino
Company.
Redwood Company isn't the ones that we're opposing in Jackson.
No, I know, but Mendocino Forest Products was the one that hired him, right? Am I wrong?
No, in Enchanted Meadow, the area around Enchanted Meadow.
I believe they're the ones that that bought the timber harvest plan, so they bought the trees. Yeah, so I'm assuming they're the ones that bought or paid for the contractors to cut it.
Yeah, but CAL FIRE has hired this security, and they call this guy a safety officer. He's anything but. He's been intimidating and harassing and threatening people, including women alone at the gate in the pre-dawn darkness. It's getting serious, folks, and we really need your help and support for this. And I just, again, thank Judy for the work that she did to oppose the FBI and all of you for defending activists' rights. And here we are testing it again. And I must say that I think we've really been protected from infiltrators in an amazing way by that lawsuit. They just really don't seem to come here as much as they did. And I think they kind of know that we're on to them. So please sign up and let us know who you are if you want to support the Jackson campaign.
Yeah.
Over here.
Thank you. I'm curious if you found any information relating to the several times in Anderson Valley when Judy the car she was driving was between two other cars, right on the tail and right on the nose. I talked to her several times about that. And the day before she was bombed, she came to my office to figure out what we might do about it, to pursue it, but that of course never came up. I'm wondering if that showed up in any details.
Are you talking about the Philo log truck ramming?
Yeah.
Yeah, she did sue them for that and she won.
Good.
I thought you knew that.
No, I didn't.
No, that was a
the
different-
logging truck, that wasn't cars.
It sounds like you guys are talking about slightly different things.
No, well, I'm not sure. I mean, I hadn't considered that for a long time.
Did she tell you she was run off the road?
No.
No, there was
a different thing.
There were incidences where Greg King as well, in a separate incident, was surrounded while he was driving on 101 in Humboldt, surrounded by cars to his front, side, and rear. And I believe the same thing might have happened to Judy at some point or another. But there were many incidences of threats, whether they were her being followed or us being followed, or letters or phone calls, or just physically people coming up to you and threatening you. That happened. So that was one of dozens of incidences.
Well, it wasn't anyone more serious than the logging truck that actually ran her car off the road when she was riding with the kids.
Although the log truck incident happened many months before Redwood Summer was announced, certainly that was of the utmost seriousness, and that set a template for police actions to come. Question over here.
Yeah, you know, I get so discouraged by the almost impenetrable wall of disinformation that everyone is subjected to now, 24/7. I mean, it's really difficult even for the most diligent to try and sort fact from fiction. And I'm not asking you to solve that problem. It seems like it's gotten worse over the last 25 years from when you all were fighting disinformation. It has become so sophisticated and so dense now. I think it's part of the reason that younger people are not so represented, though I give all the credit in the world to the Jackson State organizers because they have organized young people on the coast. But young people who have grown up with alternative facts and this constant distraction of Facebook and this onslaught of information that you can't trust. I mean, it's not surprising to me that they may feel something's amiss but don't know where to go. I mean, if those of you who are dealing in the world of the law, do you have any insights to offer on how we deal with this impenetrable wall of mistruth?
No.
Well, I think that in the world of law, if I may say, there has been quite a number of defenses, including the people who have accused Dominion voting machines of fixing the election, of being sued for over $1 billion, from Rudy Giuliani to Sidney Powell, etc. So sometimes money talks and BS walks, as the saying goes, and so putting your money where your mouth is, sometimes these people find themselves on the defensive. So yes, lawsuits have been filed, monetary lawsuits. So that has been one of the primary defenses that's been used currently. But no, the world is kind of Scotsy right now, life out of balance, and there will be a light at the end of this tunnel.
Can I just say too, I think that the tools to combat disinformation on the scale that we're seeing are the same tools that you use so incredibly well and that we used in this case, which is investigate, document, follow up, figure out what the hell's really going on. And I think one of the things that has been done with disinformation in the age of social media is that we have a very false sense from what we see online of how many people believe in this stuff, right? And that it represents they look like there's a lot of them, but amazing investigations have been done that shows the source of the disinformation campaigns. And so I think it's important to keep, just don't lose heart. We can know things. We can. A lot of people are doing a lot of work to document and research and investigate. And we seem to be at a point right now where Facebook is vulnerable, and that there may be. I hate to be optimistic. I just hate it. I mean, you always get kicked and tripped and fall on your face. But, this may be a moment where some sort of oversight is possible. And the other thing I just want to mention that's the same as in this case is that the divisions aren't being made up. That they're taking, and this is what COINTELPRO does too, is it takes divisions that exist and then makes them huge and creates the conditions for hyper amounts of conflict around it. And I think that's true too in the disinformation on the national scale, is what we're seeing is these divisions are truly in our culture, and that they're exacerbating them with all this disinformation campaign. So that can be very, very difficult. But as Judy did in her work, is as Josh eloquently described, her going out there and talking to the loggers, it's like just because those divisions exist in the society doesn't mean we have to play into them, and that our organizing should look at those places and try to Aikido or undermine or build bridges across those divisions. So
We're going to take one more question. I personally have to leave to go pick up our daughter from her music class in the Garberville metropolitan area. And we also want to leave you a little more time to see the museum, because the museum is going to close before you know it. And we want you to be able to do that. Plus, we want to be able to talk to you individually one-on-one before we go, as well as visiting our swag tables over there and signing up for the Jackson State Forest campaign. So, last question from Nicholas Wilson.
Well, hi. One thing I could add is in early 1990, I think it was March perhaps, Judy and Darryl appeared on a local cable talk show called the Ed Poet Show, or maybe it had a name besides that. Probably did. But anyway, it was local cable TV. And that was, I think, when they first announced plans for a summer of activism, and at that time they were calling it Mississippi Summer in the Redwoods. It later got shortened to Redwood Summer. But she said the reason for it is that we know that these companies are destroying the woods as fast as they can, and there's the initiative coming up called Forest Forever that's going to be on the November ballot if we can get it on. And so what we need to do is have people come from all over the place and disrupt, because otherwise the companies, knowing that this thing might pass, are going to get all the trees down as possible. So that this was kind of one of the central reasons behind doing Redwood Summer, was to keep the timber companies from liquidating the old growth in advance of the election. And then, of course, the campaign against 130 took full advantage of the bombing to portray Earth First, and everybody who was in support of reining in the timber companies, that they're all terrorists, they're all bombers, they're all, you know, that
Everybody
kind of
with
thing.
a t-shirt.
So it played right into their plans, if they weren't behind it in the first place, which I think they were. It was an information operation.
We should get that.
I want to thank everybody
secure
for
that
coming.
tape.
And it's been a pleasure. This is our number 3. Next week, actually in 10 days from now, the 20th, will be the day of the bombing, again with Betty Ball, Agnes Pontock, Karen Pickett, and myself. And then a very special closing. The last day of this exhibit is Sunday, October 24th. I said that. The last day of the exhibit is October 24th. It's a Sunday from 1 to 3. It will be the bridge building between timber workers and environmentalists, including Ernie Pardini from Pardini Logging, Art Harwood from Harwood Lumber, Walter Smith, independent logger who worked for Louisiana Pacific, as well as Steve Ungerth from the Industrial Workers of the World, myself, and I believe others. So hopefully you can make it to that final the final exhibit, and please stick around. We'll be happy to talk and chat, and it's just been again a wonderful event, a great turnout. Thank you so much for coming. Alicia, Dennis, Ben, Josh,